Hello and welcome, viewers, to another TDF exclusive. I'm very happy today to have with me Mr. Oliver Wils, head of Middle East Department in Berlin, and it's called the Berghoff Foundation. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So let's start with the conference. How's it going?
I think it's super interesting. I mean, in terms of topics and participants, and not just the topics, but also how certain topics are being discussed. I mean, we have a region full of conflicts, and so I feel that also the role of Iran in the region certainly is important, but also to understand better how Iran sees different conflicts in the region is of interest to me and to the work of my organization. Berghoff Foundation is focusing on supporting actors in conflict to reach a political solution. And of course, the Middle East is unfortunately full of conflicts. One of them is Yemen. We will focus.
Right, indeed. Yeah, let's jump into that. Let's just get into that with Yemen. For our viewers, I mean, because Yemen is probably one of the countries at the top of the news these days. How did it get here?
Well, I mean, Yemen has a long history of also unresolved conflicts, I would say. My organization has been asked to help or contribute to when the National Dialogue Conference started. So we prepared, we helped Yemen, we invited Yemeni parties to Berlin actually to discuss how the National Dialogue, what are the topics, how can it be organized. And it was quite a successful opening, I would say, of the process. And we had all relevant actors, all stakeholders there. And I think that was kind of an entry point for us also continue working with all stakeholders in Yemen on the conflict. So we had a National Dialogue Conference in 2012, 2013, which was, I would say, in many aspects successful in what it discussed, but it failed to resolve some of the major issues. And also then in the implementation, it was very hastily and, probably part of also regional realliances.
Right.
At the end, Yemen ended up in a war instead of a political transition that we hoped Yemenis could achieve through dialogue.
What would you say the biggest challenges that Yemen is facing right now?
What's facing right now is fragmentation in the country. Also, I would say, Yemen is now tied into regional context. It's not just that, the role of the neighbors, the relevance also of Palestine for Ansar Allah, the Houthis, as a policy objective. All of that makes it quite complicated. Yemen has always been a conflict that has very localized topics, and it was a national, it was a regional conflict. Now it's also a little bit even an international conflict, which makes it quite difficult to solve because, in a way, all of these levels need to be addressed. So there needs to be a certain synchronization of those different levels. Very difficult, unfortunately.
Well, let's look at what has been taking place in Yemen. Specifically, we look at the reaction that the role Yemen has taken in supporting the Palestinians. What do you make of that? Because we have many Muslim countries, many Arab countries, but Yemen is at the forefront of actually standing up for the Palestinians. I want to talk about that aspect. Why do you think that is the case? And then the effect that it has had on Yemen itself.
First, I think it's important to mention there is a long history of Yemen, of Yemenis also, of solidarity to Palestinians. It is a topic that is important. What has happened in the course of the events in Gaza, and I would not say it's Yemen taking a stance, it's very clearly Ansar Allah as a political organization to whom Palestine might be ideologically, even within its doctrine, especially relevant, took a decision. That doesn't mean that Palestine is not also important for the other political actors. I mean, the internationally recognized government, also ordinary Yemeni citizens. I think everyone feels a sense of frustration, a sense of wishing to contribute. But whether everyone would sign up to the decisions Ansar Allah has taken, I would doubt. I think that's not the case. Whether or not, clearly for Ansar Allah, that was something positioning themselves in a front, resistance front. And I would say for them it was also a political capital they built. It increased popularity on the streets. But also it created a lot of problems, I would say. The Yemen and the Houthis Ansar Allah, were close to an agreement with its neighbors, especially with Saudi Arabia, on a political solution, on a roadmap that would have also involved other Yemeni stakeholders. And this process was interrupted. So it's difficult now to weigh what is more important. Ansar Allah's support for Palestine certainly is important for Ansar Allah, or the Yemeni peace process. I don't want to judge this, but I see that this has interrupted the political process, and I think it's important to find an opportunity to go back to politics.
Right. Well, I mean, if we look at on a regular, every Friday basis, now we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people in different cities just coming out. I mean, Palestine seems to be it's as if it's part of the Yemeni DNA to defend the Palestinians. Do you not think that after this conflict, which we hope and pray will end very soon against Gaza, that political process that you were speaking of could be reignited?
I hope that, but I think it will be not that easy, because I mean, on the one hand, it's a matter of trust, and I think it's, as I said before, the Yemeni issue is a Yemeni conflict. It always has been, and it should be seen as such, but it got complicated by regional and now international involvement. So what has happened, by that, let's say the approach Ansar Allah has taken, I think has also raised a lot of concerns in the region and internationally in terms of, is Ansar Allah as an actor being able to change his behavior, in a way that, for other states, for example, it can be, it can trust that this will not be repeated. The moment there is a political problem, that Ansar Allah resorts back to using violence, and for Europe it was also seen as blackmailing, using this very strategic location. So there is an issue that has added a new layer of complications. Yet I think that we should be pragmatic, and that we should still try to support all actors in Yemen to find a political solution with the neighbors in the region that could be acceptable and supported also internationally. Okay, but it's more complicated now, to be honest.
Right. You talked about it basically being a domestic issue as far as an intra-Yemeni situation. But what do you see, how do you see the role of neighbors or neighboring countries in all of this conflict? Because, I mean, if we look at, we see that there's been a siege against Yemen for years now, in 2014, and we're 2025, and how that played a role in basically the hardships that's inside of the country, one, and two, of course, the war in dealing with Saudi Arabia and the pressure from that side. I mean, how do you see that?
I mean, the hardships are true. I mean, war creates hardships. I'm not so sure if the siege, what that did, because there were times where it was really difficult to get ships unboarding goods in Hodeidah and providing, goods of all kinds, from petrol to all parts of Yemen. But I think mostly that wasn't the major problem. The major problem was, of course, in a country at war, the economy is down, so people don't have income. So goods might be in shops, but people don't have the money to buy them. So the answer to this would be really, we need to stop the fighting, we need to stop the violence, we need to find a political process. I think that's really necessary. The region, yes, Saudi Arabia sided with the government, entered the war, but I think also Saudi Arabia and the region in total have made a clear shift also. They want to support a political solution. Again, is that so easy after being party of the conflict, then changing to a mediation support role? It's also, I think, not without challenges.
Right.
But I would say Ansar Allah has accepted that. I mean, they have engaged with Saudi Arabia, particularly with the help of Oman, to facilitate a political process. So again, they were quite close to agree on a roadmap to solve the issues in Yemen.
And we've seen, you talked about Hodeidah, we know that the port was hit by the United States, and of course then that ended the, if we want to say, the conflict between, it seems, the United States excuse me, and Yemen right now has somewhat lessened or hopefully subsided. Your overall take in the role that the United States, if you feel it's played any role in complicating matters or not in Yemen, and where do you see this going from here?
Oh, a big question. I think for a long time, of course, the US tried not to interfere in that conflict. It was mostly seen as a Gulf issue, and it was mostly also, I think, from a Saudi perspective. The Saudis took or considered the Yemen conflict foremost something they have a responsibility to address, because they saw it as the main security threat, because they share a long border, and historically, I mean, there is a lot of interlinkages, historical baggage or traditions that could be used. The US, I think, came more forcefully in after the attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Also Europe sent a naval mission of a much more defensive character, but I think there was a sense of a frustration dealing with a situation that became very difficult to handle without having a clear political concept. So while I understood from some perspective, European, US and other actors wish really that needs to be contained or mitigated. So it was, I think, never aimed at solving the conflict. It was trying to reduce, but it not really worked. So I think in a way that the Houthis and the US agreed on cessation of hostilities, a bilateral agreement, again facilitated by Oman. I think it's a good step.
Right.
But again, we need to see now the next steps. And it's, for me, while I wish that we come back, and I see the necessity for the Yemeni people to come back to a political process, it's for me, again, a matter of trust, a matter of making sure that certain things are historic but can be overcome and we can open a new chapter. That is not so clear to me if the involved parties really are at that point.
Well, let's hope, we definitely hope the best for the Yemeni people. Mr. Oliver Wils, head of the Middle East Department, Berlin Berghoff Foundation, I appreciate you speaking.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
And thank you, viewers, for being with us for another TDF exclusive. And hopefully we'll be seeing you really soon with another one. Goodbye for now.